Hello my fiery friends, the Infernoman here with our latest deck tech for you to build. And for today's deck tech, we're going to be covering for the first time ever Brawl. This will be our first, but obviously not last deck tech we'll be doing on this. So I decided to actually go into Brawl, mostly just because I wanted to just spice things up. Don't worry, we do have deck techs and other future decks coming up, but we're going to wait for Streets of Competent to come out. But until then, we're going to be showing off this budget deck tech that anyone on Arena can build. How budget are we talking? How about one rare? And the only rare you need is for the commander itself. Everything else is all commons and uncommons. But before we get into that, again, if you are new to this channel, here's how we break this down for you. Or at least, let's change it up a little bit since we are doing Brawl. First, we'll cover our commander and what we're trying to do with our game plan. Then we'll talk about the creatures in the deck. We'll then go over the non-creature spells, specifically the instants and sorceries. Then we'll talk about the non-land permanents, such as your artifacts and enchantments. We'll then cover the land base at the very end. And if you are a fan of this stuff, please make sure to give a like on the video and subscribe to the channel to see all the deck techs, booster pack openings, and more. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Our commander, as I just mentioned earlier, is going to be Torban, Thrain of Redfell. For 4 mana, is a Dwarf Noble for 2/4. If a red source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. So the whole basis of our deck is going to be focusing on pretty much an aggro game plan with a backup burn out game plan. But because of how Torban works, it's honestly not going to be very much in our favor to kind of go for bigger creatures. We want to stick to small creatures that may do only 1 or 2 damage, and adding on that 2 extra damage on top of it will then close out the game a little quicker. We're also going to try to build around some of the weaknesses of this deck initially, because keep in mind, we are going to be playing on a budget. So we'll have to work to the strengths of what we can work with on a lower curve. So with that, we're going to now go over the creatures and explain to you how the game plan works using Torban. So as I mentioned, Torban's major buff is going to be to smaller creatures that can punch above their weight limit. And as you kind of notice, the easiest tribe that we can use with this game plan is Goblins. So we're going to be utilizing a lot of Goblins. As you can see, 28 creatures total. Most of them are Goblins. There's a couple of support creatures, but we'll go over that in a second. So in the 1-drop slot, you'll be utilizing cards of Artillery Enthusiast to get you another card out of your deck by using the Seek mechanic. Fanatical Firebrand does 1 damage, it's hasty, can ping if you really have to. Fireblade Charger can do also a little bit of extra damage. We have some equipment in the deck, and again, we'll get to that in a little bit. So if it does die, hopefully we can do a little bit more extra damage to the face. Foundry Street Denizen is also really sweet as well as a 1-drop, because every time we bring in another red creature, it just starts pumping itself up. Even though it's only temporary, it still gets in some sweet early damage. Goblin Arsonist, same thing as the Firebrand, also for pinging. Goblin Banneret can add some counters if we trigger the Adventure mechanic. Goblin Cavalier, similar to the Fireblade Charger, can also get some extra damage by pumping itself up with equipment. Rabbit Battery is not a goblin, but it gives one of our other goblins haste and also a +1/+1 bonus. Skirt Prospector can turn any one of our goblins, if we need to, into some extra mana that we can use for other means. Spear Skewer just pings our opponent a little bit. If we can just get ahead on board and just start slowly pinging away back and forth, we may take some damage, but in the process, we can close out the game a little bit faster. And Torch Courier is also hasty, but also it allows itself to be sacked, so that way we can bring in something hasty, such as our Torban if we need to cast it. In the 2-drop slot, you're going to be utilizing Battle Cry Goblin, which is going to be one of our pseudo lords that can also pump the whole team and start creating more tokens. Fissure Wizard to do some looting. Goblin Crate Makers are little utility, which mostly we can use to take away any of our opponent's non-land permanents that's a colorless. Mostly it's going to be sniping artifacts. Goblin Instigator just brings out 2 bodies for 2 mana. Diamond Bear is also one of our non-goblins, but it allows us to keep our life total high anytime we cast a red colored card. Gem Palm Incinerator, you're going to be mostly utilizing this for the cycling ability, just ping out something on the board. Goblin Matron is our tutor to help pull out any one of our other goblins we may need to pinch. The Ruin Blaster is for land hate. Tuk Tuk Rebel Ford just gives everything we have haste. The War Chief brings all of our goblins down to a slightly cheaper price. Doesn't really help too much, but it doesn't hurt to have it. In the 4-drop slot, you'll have Goblin Ringleader to bring in some extra goblins out of our deck. Twin Shot Sniper, mostly you want to use this for the channel ability, same thing, just to ping something out. Volley Veteran, if we have enough goblins out, can just get something off of the field. Beetleback Chief and Goblin Gang Leader do the exact same thing, they just bring out more goblins when they come out to the battlefield. And in the final 5-drop slot on the far end, we have the Battle Squadron. Hilariously, it's our only goblin that actually can fly. But there you go, everybody. That's basically all of our goblins. If you haven't noticed already, almost all of our goblins either do only 1 or 2 damage. damage. With Torban, they can now do 3 to 4, but there's also another specific reason why we want to pick these goblins particularly. For your instants and sorceries, we're going to be doing a small mix of everything. We will have some spot removal, we have some pseudo ramp, we do have some card draw, and we do have some ways of making extra goblin tokens. So specifically, let's go over our 1-drops first. You have Ancestral Anger just to give a little pump and draw. Collateral Damage can sack away any one of our creatures to turn it into a burn spell. Crash Through helps us draw and also give all of our goblins trample. And the Festivities is a small ping that can take out most of our enemy tokens and also can do some extra damage to face and to a planeswalker. Pillar of Flame, 2 damage. It's a slow version of a shock, but it helps us exile a creature. Play with Fire, same thing as a shock, just allows us to scry if we hit to face. Shock, of course, is what we need. Spikefield Hazard can be a land if we need it to in a pinch, but mostly we just want to use it for that 1 ping of damage. Strike It Rich is going to help us create some treasures. Warlord's Fury, similar to Crash Through, just helps give our creatures some extra abilities and also lets us draw. And in the 2-drop slot, we have a Braid to deal either damage or destroy an artifact. Blur Up Blades can get rid of also some weak creatures and do some damage to our opponent. Cathartic Pyro and Cathartic Reunion just help us either draw cards, or we can also do some extra damage with the Pyre. Fire Prophecy, also a little spot removal. Heartfire, similar to the collateral damage, just sacks and does a little bit more damage to it at the cost of an extra mana. Lightning Strike, also more damage. Racking Claws can help us get a surprise victory against our opponent by giving our creature double strike, and if we don't need it, cycling it away is also sweet. Royal Eruption is just a slow version of a Lightning Strike. Scorching Dragonfire, same thing as the Pillar of Flame, but it also just does a little bit extra damage and also at instant speed. And Thrill of Possibility, similar extra card draw with the looting effect. In the 3-drop, we have Light Up the Stage. Mostly you're going to be casting this for the spectacle cost. You see a pair of goblins gives us a choice. We can either pump up the whole team and do a massive swing, or we can also create some extra goblin creatures. And finally, on the far end, Goblin Rally can create us 4 goblin creature tokens. But there you go. That's all your instants and sorceries. Let's go over now your non-land permanent spells. We're going to be utilizing 15 non-land permanents in the deck. So going over again, starting with the 1-drops, Dueling Rapier just comes in. It's like a pseudo version of a mini Embercleave, and it does a little extra damage. Add it to one of our goblins that benefits from getting equipment. Experimental Synthesizers helps us get some extra card draw. Soul Guy Lantern, your always catch-all graveyard hates. Cavalcade of Calamity is going to help us also ensure that we can pump a little extra damage out of our weak little goblins. But if we can have this out along with Torban, oh, we can do a lot of damage and close out the game very quickly with it. Goblin Morningstar, mostly I honestly picked this for flavor, but also it gives us a sweet bonus if we can get that goblin creature if we roll an extra 10+, and also kind of goes well with the Dueling Rapier. Makeshift Munitions is going to be helpful in order to get rid of any of our goblins that are doing nothing. In case we have to deal with a Wrath, we can ping away our own board and just start dishing out extra damage to our opponent. Goblin Aura Flame is allowing us to pump all of our attacking creatures an extra +1. Omen of the Forge is just a shock, and we can sack it away to scry 2. Flame of Keld you might want to hold on to as mostly a pseudo cheap finisher, allowing us to just discard our hand. Usually the way this deck works is if you're being aggro, you should pretty much have an empty hand by the time you get a Flame of Keld, and then just gets us 2 card draw. And if you can just hang in there a little bit longer, it stacks up its damage similar to Torban. So this can also help us close out the game very quickly. Ichor Wellspring doesn't look like it does much, but it allows us to draw a card when it enters the battlefield, and if we sack it through any one of our effects such as Makeshift Munitions, it also allows us to get an extra card out of the deal. Raid Bombardment is just a slightly more expensive version of our Cavalcade of Calamity, but also it helps us out because this allows us to do extra damage with a creature that has power 2 or less. And as you kind of saw, 90% of our deck is going to be all goblins that do 2 or 1 damage. Heraldic Banner just gives us an extra little pump in case we can't get our Raid Bombardment, or if we can't get out the Cavalcade, and also allows us to fix our mana a little better. Herald's Horn is also pretty nice here because this allows us to get a pseudo card advantage by calling out Goblin. As you can see right here, it says creature spells you cast of the chosen type cost 1 less, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you look at the top card of your library, and if it's the creature card of your chosen type, you can reveal it and put it into your hand. And finally, on the far end, Jaya Venerated Fire Mage. This is a worse version of Torban. As you see, if another red source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals that much damage +1 to that permanent or player. And also you can -2 to do 2 extra damage as a really bad shock. But this is the reason why we want to use it, is it does help stack with Torban. Torban honestly is a lot better, but also the downside is Torban is also a creature, which means it's more susceptible to removal versus Jaya. So if you really have to, sometimes you might want to put out Jaya. It doesn't hurt. It gets us still a little extra damage. And if you can get both of these out at the same time, you can do a lot of damage very quickly to close out the game. The good news about utilizing a monocolored commander is your land base is as simple as it can get. And that's also why we wanted to start with this as our budget option. 25 mountains, although you can actually even get away with just all mountains, but because we do, and we do have a lot of extra utilities we can take advantage of, we're going to use copies of Forgotten Cave. If we need to, we can cycle it. Dwarven Mine, if we time it just right, can get us an extra token just for free. Sunscorch Desert doesn't really do much of anything except does one minor ping. It doesn't even really help with Torban, but the reason why we want to have it in here is because we're also utilizing Ramanop Ruins. So instead, we can have the Sunscorch Desert do one little ping and then sack it before Ramanop Ruins, so we can kind of get a little extra damage if the game goes long. Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse, they're mostly here just to get some of our extra mountains out of the deck and thin the deck a little bit. Field of Ruin gets rid of those enemy lands that we have a hard time dealing with, mostly creature lands. Reliquary Tower is pretty much a standard. It just makes sure that we don't have to worry about our hand size. And finally, Roadside Reliquary. A little spice, not anything super crazy, but when we sack it, it allows us to draw a card if we control an artifact and a second card if we control an enchantment. We have only a handful in this deck, but it doesn't hurt to have it. Alright everybody, if you've made it this far into the video, congratulations and thank you. You, as always, are my true fiery friends. And for that, if you stick around for just a minute, here's how I would recommend upgrading this deck. Now, as you can see on the screen, I decided we're going to stick to the Goblin game plan and we're just going to go all in on it while also beefing up some of our other more weaker cards. The good news about Torban, however, is you can upgrade this however you want. You can go completely into the burn package. You can go maybe mono red control with just tons of wraths and just closing out the game with a couple handful of creatures. You can go more towards a artifact style deck and then maybe just ramp into some kind of colorless thing like, oh, I don't know, maybe Ugin. But who wants to do that? Me personally, I love goblins. So let's go all in on it. So as you see on screen right now, we've added in a ton of more rare goblins that can make our game plan a lot more beefier and a lot more scarier versus our opponent. So not going to go over every single one of these because that's going to take a while, but let's kind of cover some of the more essentials that I would say. Cards like Faithless Looting allow us to draw 2 cards and discard 2 for a much cheaper price than say something like, oh, I don't know, Cathartic Reunion. Lightning Bolts, just get rid of Lightning Strike. Lightning Bolts, just quintessential, fantastic, love it. It's easy. 3 damage, 1 mana. Can't say enough about that. Other cards that you want to add in to beef up your creature game plan, Pashlik Mons, cards like Legion War Boss, Relic Robber, Squee the Immortal's a great sack outlet. You can use Krenko Mob Boss, which is actually kind of hilarious with a card I decided to add in. So if you actually added First Day of Class with Krenko and start tapping this to get some Goblin tokens, every one of those tokens that comes in will then get a +1/+1 counter on it and becomes hasty. So that just goes nuts with this if you can pull that combo off. Other cards that would help you out, Siege Gang Commander, which is also another sack outlet and also does a little bit more damage. Speaking of sack outlets, we decided to toss out one of our other cards, which was Makeshift Munitions. The cheaper option that we have is Barrage of Expendables. So even though you kind of notice we got rid of a handful of our more cheaper, weaker artifact cards, Barrage of Expendables is actually a lot better for us, mostly because we have a lot more tokens to work with some of our rare creatures that we are utilizing. And also it's a lot easier to bring in because it's only going to cost you 1 mana. Other cards that you want to look at is possibly more lords. So Hobgoblin Bandit Lord, you're going to utilize Goblin Chieftain, you'll utilize Goblin Trashmaster. There's a ton of options here. So that's pretty much it in terms of just upgrading just the pure Goblin game plan. As for your land base, this is also where you can get a lot of sweet upgrades that will make this deck a lot more versatile. Castle Embereth can help pump your creatures up a lot more. Den of the Bugbear itself makes goblins. You'll want to keep some of your utilities such as Dwarven Mine and Forgotten Cave. We're going to minimize a little less the mountains and add in some stuff such as Sokazin Crucible of Defiance. Doesn't make goblins, but those tokens are hasty and it actually can help out close out the game in a pinch if you needed to. Other creature lands you want are Crawling Barrens. Of course, me personally, there is one other game plan on here that helps us close out the game in an instant. Just keep in mind that anytime you play, say, a commander or brawl deck, you always want to have at least one almost game-ending combo win just to close it out. So our game plan, of course, is going to be utilizing the card of Star of Extinction with Brash Taunter. If you haven't seen this combo before, basically whenever the Taunter is dealt damage, it deals that much damage to a target opponent. So if we can just weaken our opponent just enough and hopefully they tap out, Star of Extinction deals 20 damage to everything and including planeswalkers. This will kill our whole board, but if we have that out with Brash Taunter, that basically ensures that we win. So that's just a cheap, easy combo. And yes, I know, I'm gonna say it, we do have Muxes. We had to have Muxes. It's essential for this. And there you go, everybody. That is Torban on a budget of only utilizing one rare, and everything else is only going to cost you a common or uncommon. So tell me, what do you think? Are you a fan of Brawl? Is this how you get your fix if you just can't do Commander like me? Let me know in the comments below, and I would love to hear from you. Also, before we go, if you do like these kinds of budget decks, or if you actually want to see me make full-sized upgrade ones, again, please make sure to give a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss those upcoming Brawl deck techs. But until next time, thanks again for watching, everyone, and just remember that no matter what you do play in the game of life, always be sure to burn bright. Later!